Living on the edge of a rural subdivision had its perks. My backyard stretched out into open fields, with wildflowers swaying in the wind and the occasional deer wandering by. It was my sanctuary, my escape from the world. At least it used to be. When the HOA president, Karen, moved in next door, the peace began to evaporate. Karen was everything you'd expect from an HOA enforcer. Sharp-tongued, quick to judge, and obsessed with imposing her will on everyone around her. She had the kind of confidence that only came from laminated rules and a clipboard. From the moment she moved in, she'd been pushing her boundaries, literally. First, it was complaints about the height of my hedges. Then she accidentally extended her sprinkler system into my yard. I ignored her antics as much as I could. After all, my property wasn't part of the HOA, and her rules didn't apply to me. But Karen didn't see it that way. One morning I stepped out to water my garden and froze. There it was, a brand new wrought iron gate built right into the fence separating my yard from hers. What in the world? I muttered, dropping my watering can. The gate was shiny, complete with a decorative arch and an ornate handle. It looked expensive, but that wasn't the point. Karen had installed it without asking, on my fence on my land. I marched over to her house and rang the doorbell. It didn't take long for Karen to answer, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the doorframe. "Oh, hello," she said, feigning surprise. "Can I help you?" "You put a gate in my fence," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Karen's expression didn't waver. "Oh, that. Isn't it lovely? It's for easier access to the greenbelt." "There's no greenbelt," I replied sharply. "That's my private property." Karen waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so territorial. It's just a gate. You'll hardly notice it. I don't care how small it is. You didn't ask for my permission." She crossed her arms, her demeanor turning icy. "Well, I didn't think I needed to. We're neighbors. Sharing access is the neighborly thing to do." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Sharing access to my yard? It's just for convenience," she said with a shrug. "I assumed you'd understand." I didn't bother arguing further. Karen was the kind of person who didn't listen, and it was clear she wasn't going to fix this on her own. I spent the rest of the day calling surveyors and checking my property line. As I suspected, the fence and now the gate were well within my boundaries. Legally, Karen had no right to modify it. That night, as I stared out at the gate glinting under the moonlight, an idea began to form. Karen thought she could waltz into my yard without a second thought. Well, she was about to learn a lesson in boundaries, one brick at a time. "You said." The next day, I decided it was time to take control of the situation. If Karen thought her gate was going to stay, she was in for a rude awakening. But before I made any moves, I needed to ensure my plan was solid, literally and legally. First, I paid a visit to the county clerk's office. With the property survey and deed in hand, I verified that the fence and now the gate were firmly on my side of the boundary line. I even got a few copies of the documents, just in case Karen tried to argue otherwise. Satisfied, I made a stop at the local hardware store. Bricks, mortar, and a trowel filled my cart, along with a pair of sturdy work gloves. As I loaded the supplies into my truck, the store clerk raised an eyebrow. "Building something?" he asked. "You could say that," I replied with a grin. Back at home, I waited until the sun dipped low and Karen's house was dark. It wasn't that I was hiding, I just wanted to avoid any unnecessary confrontation. I grabbed my supplies and headed to the fence, flashlight in hand. The gate looked even more obnoxious up close, with its gaudy wrought iron and unnecessary embellishments. I couldn't help but shake my head. "You had this coming," I muttered, setting the first brick in place. Layer by layer, I built a solid wall where the gate once stood. The work was slow but satisfying, each brick erasing a little more of Karen's audacity. By the time I finished, the moon was high in the sky, and my masterpiece stood firm. The next morning, I heard the familiar sound of Karen's voice drifting through my open window. "What the?" I smiled as I poured myself a cup of coffee, waiting for the inevitable knock at my door. Sure enough, Karen arrived moments later, her face a mix of disbelief and outrage. "You bricked up my gate," she shrieked. I opened the door, leaning casually against the frame. "You mean my fence?" "Yes, I fixed it." Karen's hands balled into fists. "That's vandalism. You had no right." "Oh, I had every right," I interrupted, holding up the property survey. "See this line? That gate was on my land. You built it without permission and I removed it. End of story." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But. "No buts," I said firmly. "If you want access to my property, you ask for permission. And even then the answer is no." Karen stomped off, muttering something about calling the HOA board. I chuckled to myself. Let her try, they had no jurisdiction here. That evening, as I admired my handiwork, I noticed something unusual. A piece of paper was taped to the fence where the gate once stood. It was an official-looking notice stamped with the HOA logo. It read, "Cease and desist, unauthorized modification of shared property." I laughed out loud. Karen just didn't know when to quit. This wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever she had up her sleeve. "You says you're obstructing access to HOA property." Of course she did, I replied, shaking my head. "I've got the deed, the survey, and about 100 photos to prove otherwise. Want to swing by and take a look?" "I thought you might say that," Daniels replied. "Be there in 20. When he arrived, I handed over the documents and walked him to the fence. Daniels examined the bricked-up gate, nodding appreciatively. "Nice work," he said with a smirk. "Thanks," I replied. "Karen doesn't seem to understand the concept of private property." "She's persistent, I'll give her that," he said. "But the law's on your side. I'll make sure she understands that." While Daniels handled the legalities, I focused on fortifying my defenses, figuratively and literally. I installed a set of security cameras along the fence, each one angled to capture any unwelcome visitors. The footage would stream directly to my phone, ensuring I'd have proof if Karen decided to escalate. Sure enough, it didn't take long for her to make her next move. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I noticed a strange glow near the fence. Curious, I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. There she was, Karen, flashlight in one hand, clipboard in the other, barking orders at a group of workers unloading tools and materials. "Stop right there," I called out, my voice cutting through the night. Karen froze, spinning around with a faux innocent expression. "Oh, hi there. We're just making some adjustments to the fence." "Adjustments?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "On my property?" Karen waved her clipboard. "Actually, the HOA has determined that this area is part of the community's shared resources. We're expanding access to the greenbelt." I fought the urge to laugh. "First of all, there's no greenbelt. Second, this fence is mine. You and your workers are trespassing." Karen's smug smile faltered, but she pressed on. "I have the authority." "No, Karen, you don't," I interrupted, pulling out my phone. "And if you don't leave in the next 5 minutes, the sheriff will be here to explain that to you." Her workers exchanged nervous glances, clearly realizing they'd been dragged into something they didn't want any part of. "You'll regret this," Karen hissed before stomping off, her entourage in tow. I spent the rest of the evening double-checking my cameras and securing the fence. By the time I finished, the yard was quiet again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done. She was determined, I'd give her that. But I was determined too. And Karen was about to learn that she'd picked a fight she couldn't win. "You said," by Karen herself, declaring that the fence and gate were now communal property, and demanding I remove my unauthorized modifications. I couldn't help but laugh. The sheer audacity of Karen's claim was almost impressive. But if she thought a piece of paper was going to scare me, she clearly didn't understand who she was dealing with. That afternoon, I filed a formal complaint with the county. I included all my documentation, the survey, the deed, the footage of Karen trespassing, and even the laughable HOA notice. The clerk assured me they'd take it seriously. Next, I contacted a lawyer, Rebecca, the same sharp legal mind who'd helped me before. She was eager to take on Karen again, and this time we were playing for keeps. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca filed a lawsuit against Karen and the HOA for trespassing, property damage, and harassment. She also filed an injunction to prevent Karen from making any further modifications to the fence. Karen predictably tried to fight back. She showed up to the first court hearing with her usual bravado, clipboard in hand. But when the judge reviewed the evidence, her confidence crumbled. "This court finds no basis for the defendant's claims," the judge declared, his voice firm. "The property in question is clearly the plaintiff's, as evidenced by the survey and deed. The HOA has no jurisdiction, and the actions taken by Ms. Karen and her workers constitute trespassing and harassment." Karen's face turned beet red as the judge ordered her to pay damages and legal fees. She was also slapped with a restraining order, barring her from coming within 50 feet of my property. But the real cherry on top came when the HOA board ousted Karen from her position. It turned out I wasn't the only one fed up with her antics. Other neighbors had their own grievances and were more than happy to vote her out. With Karen officially dethroned, I decided to make one final statement. One quiet evening, I set to work again, this time building a small addition to the brick wall I'd constructed over the gate. When I was finished, I stepped back to admire my handiwork. The addition was a plaque engraved with the words, "Private property, built to last, boundaries not for sale." The neighbors loved it, especially the ones who'd suffered under Karen's reign. My yard became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that sometimes standing your ground, literally and figuratively, pays off. As for Karen, she put her house on the market a month later and disappeared from the neighborhood. Standing in my yard, watching the sun set behind the sturdy brick-covered gate, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Karen had tried to push her way into my life, but in the end she was the one who'd been locked out. "You said